it going? My name's Cooper Ceva, and I'm here with County Legislator Bridget Fleming, and today we're going to be discussing water quality on the east end of Long Island. So my first question is, what is the cause of the water pollution? And I've been doing research previously in the pollution of Montauk, and they have an issue of nutrients leaking from septic systems into the groundwater. Is it a similar issue that's going on with that of Long Island?
Yeah, so we learned all the way back in the 1980s that nitrogen pollution was probably, and excess nitrogen was probably the cause of, even back to the collapse of the clamshell harvest in the Great South Bay back in the 1980s. And there wasn't a lot of science around it at that time, although it was suspected that it was nitrogen pollution and that it was probably wastewater treatment that was leading to it. So fast forward a couple of decades, and a number of organizations and Suffolk County government started looking into it, from a very scientific perspective. And sure enough, that's what the data shows. It's there's just no question that some of the things that we're seeing around degraded water comes from over nitrification, and that nitrification absolutely comes from outdated wastewater systems.
And what is the largest issue that's posed by this pollution? Does it affect mainly groundwater, or does it affect potable water as well?
It's a great question. So groundwater, we on Long Island are served by an aquifer. It's the sole source of our drinking water. So potable water is our groundwater. It's the same thing. It's right under our feet. That's where we get our drinking water. Other communities, you have reservoirs and other sources of water, but for us, it's right below our feet. And so absolutely, every contaminant that we contribute to the ground and to the groundwater is then, then actually impacts our drinking water. Of course, now we have treated water, but it all comes from the aquifer. So we need to treat it before we drink it, when it has contamination. And that we've seen from chemicals, but we've also seen it from nitrogen. And then the thing is that the groundwater is what feeds the surface water. So our bays, our harbors, our rivers, our creeks, those all are impacted by the groundwater. So, the not taking good care of the wastewater, so that the high levels of nitrogen are moving into the groundwater, means not only are they impacting potentially drinking water, but they're also impacting our bays and harbors and creeks.
And the bays and harbors and creeks, those are some of the main draw factors of the tourism industry of Montauk and the East End.
Yeah.
And how can you foresee the pollution of the groundwater and the harbors affecting these industries?
Well, we've seen beach closures, for instance, across the whole county. I mean, Suffolk County is 1,000 miles of coastline. So if you count the coastline around the edges of our region, and then also internal water bodies, it's really over 1,000 miles of coastline. I mean, in Montauk, coastline is most of Montauk. So it's critically important that we take good care of the waters, because, as you mentioned, it's really the engine that drives our local economy, whether it's tourists or, marine industries, recreational boating, recreational fishing, and even Montauk is a huge commercial fishing site as well. We have also the Shinnecock dock over in Hampton Bays, is the second largest commercial fishing dock in the region. So critically important that we take good care of the waters, because you're right, it absolutely affects the economy, in not only the economy of the East End, but the economy of the region as a whole.
And with recreational boating and swimming on the East End, how could the pollution of the groundwater and the lakes affect humans and contact with this polluted water? How could it affect the health of people?
Well, we've seen that nitrogen pollution in particular has the impact of creating or cultivating or allowing what they call harmful alga blooms. So it's the brown tide, the mahogany tide, also very dangerous blue-green algae. And all of these can have varying levels of health impacts. Unfortunately, some years ago in Georgia Pond, a dog actually died of blue-green algae exposure. And, we see varying impacts from like itchy skin to what could be worse. At this point, the human impacts are not grave like they were for the poor dog and that passed away, but still, there's just no question that it's far healthier to have surface waters that are pristine. We can fix the problem. We just need to have the will to do it and have the resources to do it. And it's important when you think about the health impacts.
Yes, of course. And we mentioned earlier that the commercial fishing industry is one of the largest industries out on the East End. How does the water pollution affect the life of marine animals and therefore impacts people who ingest the fish that are brought in by commercial fishermen?
Well, for the most part, the nitrogen pollution is not going to have an impact if you eat fish that were exposed to it, that I'm aware of. And the science, is still ongoing. And I know that there are a number of really great scientific institutions, whether it's Stony Brook University or Cornell Cooperative and others that are studying this all the time. But I think one of the major impacts of nitrogen pollution is the habitat degradation. So, for instance, mollusks, scallops, scallops and clams begin to grow on eelgrass. And if you don't have eelgrass, it's very difficult to cultivate those mollusks, and they're really important. So we lost a lot of eelgrass because of nitrogen pollution. It's one of the reasons why they say the clams collapsed in the Great South Bay. But that's the sort of thing that we have to be really mindful of when you start to see the natural systems degrade. Then the wildlife that grows there, and like the marine life that we use to sustain ourselves, can't grow either. And so it has a long-term effect because the food chain and then the habitat of the marine life, is all connected. When one starts to degrade, it's hard for the rest to survive.
Yeah, of course. And clams and oysters have a trait where they help to filter water. Does this help with the over-nitrification of the water?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there are a number of programs now that are shellfish hatcheries that are actually farming shellfish, so oysters in particular, and it's throughout East Hampton. East Hampton Town Trustees even have a program that cultivates aquaculture, they call it, where they are growing oysters in a farm-like setting. Those things are very important because one oyster can filter up to 50 gallons a day. So they're filtering out those contaminants while they're also, growing into food. So very, very important to cultivate the shellfish industry here.
And also, what are some things that the county legislator is doing right now to help to resolve this issue and limit the effects of the pollution?
Well, what we found, as I mentioned, is that it's outdated wastewater treatment that's really responsible for this. So it's human waste, which has a high nitrogen content, is going into our groundwater, like you said, and then into the surface waters. So we need to prevent that. We need to start to reduce that. Sewers do that, but most of Suffolk County is not sewered. So 70% of Suffolk County does not have sewers, which are systems that pull contaminants out of the wastewater, right? So what we've learned is that we can install individual residential wastewater treatment systems that have the same effect. They also pull nitrogen and other contaminants out of wastewater. So Suffolk County now about 6 years ago, began to set up a program. I was on the working group that helped set this program up that began to pilot and then license these individual residential septic program systems and then oversee the installation. So individual homeowners can put these systems into their own homes or the areas around their homes, and they will be contributing to pulling the nitrogen out. And we also have a grant program that we stood up in order to help homeowners with the financial burden of making these improvements to their wastewater treatment.
And with these septic systems and the upgraded septic systems, is it a entirely new replacement, or is it like an addition that people can put on their septic systems?
That's a great question. So many of these, it's 360,000 systems are the 70% that aren't sewered. It's a lot. And some of them are just cesspools, which don't have any kind of filtration. They're just the round cement rings that you see going in and without any filtration. Those are like, they're just like almost pollution injection. It goes directly into the water. So you can upgrade, or you can put in a whole new system, or you can do a hybrid of those. So right now, since this whole industry started to grow about 6 or 7 years ago, there are a number of different techniques that are being employed that are, that sort of range between a sewer system and then all the way down to just adding something like a carbon filter to your already existing system. The best thing to do if you're not in a sewer, a situation in a sewer district, which is most of our East End communities, the best thing to do is to put in one of these septic systems, and that's a wholesale change. You would switch out your old cesspool or septic system that's like rings, and then you would put instead in one of these individual residential, what we call on-site wastewater treatment systems.
And is there anything on a smaller scale that individuals can do to help reduce this pollution aside from getting upgraded septic systems or making improvements?
Well, I'd say one thing is what you're doing right now, right? So you're doing this great project that is telling other people about what the problem is, and I think that has a huge impact, and we'll continue to do that on all kinds of levels. But I want to congratulate you because it's a smart thing, and it really helps the community so people understand what we are dealing with. But generally speaking, you want to just be mindful that what you're putting in your sink, if you don't yet have one of these systems, or what you're dumping in the ground or anywhere else, is going into our sole source aquifer. We don't have an alternative. There's no plan B for water on Long Island. So I think being mindful of what you're contributing is very important. And that includes not only upgrading wastewater, but think also about anything you're dumping down the drain or flushing down the toilet, whether it's pharmaceuticals or other contaminants, those are going directly into our bays and harbors. So I think what you're doing is really helpful to bring awareness to that, and everyone can just think about what they're doing when they try. Things don't go away when you dispose of them. They go somewhere. And for when you're talking about drains and systems of wastewater treatment, they're going into our bays.
Yes, of course. All right. Thank you very much for meeting today. And I would like to thank you guys all for listening today. And let's make an effort to keep our waters clean.
Great job, Cooper. Thank you. Very good.